Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, and in this episode I interview my professor, Dr. Sue Brown, on Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. This episode serves as part of the Maharishi Vedic Science miniseries, so if you enjoyed the discussion, check out the rest in episodes 47 through 53. In this conversation, Dr. Brown and I discuss the Bhagavad Gita's setting on a battlefield, the ultimate location of conflict and extreme differences. We discuss how the battlefield is symbolic of the challenges people face in the world. Dr. Brown describes how to go inward in the field of unity in order to transcend these conflicts. Next, we consider this act of transcending as the essence of the Bhagavad Gita and the practice of transcendental meditation as a pathway for avoiding war. Sue describes Chapter 2, verses 45 and 48 as master keys to unlocking the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. We discuss the events of the Gita in the broader context of the Mahabharata in which they take place. From there, Dr. Brown explains how Maharishi's commentary differs from those of other sages throughout the ages. We consider the universal field of consciousness which our individual brains reflect. We discuss how Krishna helps Arjuna navigate the conflict between his heart and mind, between the collective consciousness demands for him to defend his people, while also having compassion for the family members on the opposing force whom he must kill. Dr. Brown and I discuss how the human dilemmas captured in the Bhagavad Gita are universal issues encountered throughout the ages. Next, we consider Samkhya, theoretical, and Yoga, practical knowledge contained in the Gita. We discuss how Arjuna reconciles the sin of murder and war with the transcendental forces of collective consciousness. We consider the time period of the Bhagavad Gita and the similarities with our current Kali Yuga, an age of stress. We discuss the opportunity we currently have to usher in Sat Yuga, a time of construction and creativity. From there, we dive into Chapter 3 and ideas of Yagya, Dharma, Karma Yoga, the path of action, and Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. We discuss why the danger of following another's Dharma is more dangerous than death. We then discuss Chapter 4 and how action and renunciation of action are two sides of the same coin. We consider misinterpretations of the Gita, including those who view renunciation or detachment as a necessary state of life rather than as a state of consciousness. We consider the rise and fall of knowledge throughout time. Dr. Brown explains why Maharishi chose to emphasize his teaching on the practical effect of enlightenment, not just the theoretical knowledge. We discuss the four pillars of yoga, Raja, Karma, Bhakti, and Jnana Yoga, and the concept of moksha, or liberation. We consider how action in accordance with natural law leads to spontaneous right action, and how the path of enlightenment is one of effortlessness and bliss. We then discuss Krishna's final words to Arjuna in Chapter 6, his guidance, therefore be a yogi. We end the conversation discussing the state of unity consciousness and how Brahman consciousness refers to regaining memory of totality. Music from the show is available on the Spotify playlist Entangled the Vibes. If you like the show, please drop a 5-star review and subscribe on Substack, Spotify, X, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please enjoy the episode. So good evening, Dr. Brown. Thank you so much for joining the Entangled podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to you about the Bhagavad Gita. I really enjoyed both of your courses earlier this year on it. And so, just so much knowledge to bring out from that book. I'm sure we'll only be able to scratch the surface of it. But before we get into all that, would love to learn a little bit more about your own background and how you got involved at Maharishi International.
Sure. I'm originally from Australia, and I studied in my undergraduate studies, I studied literature and music at the University of Melbourne. And I learned the practice of transcendental meditation soon after that, actually through my father, interestingly enough. And there's a bit of a story there. And then I trained as a TM teacher, but I always wanted to study more. And when I heard about MIU, I thought, that's where I'd like to be. Actually, when I was training as a TM teacher, it was the early days of planning for MIU. So I heard quite a lot about the early days of planning and was in some of the meetings that Maharishi held with the founding faculty. So I was very young. I wasn't directly involved, but it just inspired me. I didn't come here for another 10 years or so, but it was in the back of my mind that I would love to come to MIU. Yeah.
And I correct that you did your PhD at MIU before joining the faculty?
Yes, I did. I came in 1983 when we had a very big gathering here, 8,000 people on what was called the Taste of Utopia Assembly. And then my late husband and I wanted to stay here and be part of that big group. And to do that, we did a master's degree first. There was a master's degree that enabled international people to work for the university and study at the same time. So first of all, I did my master's degree in higher education administration. And then I went on to my PhD and then onto faculty.
And how did you end up teaching the course on the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, it's always been an aspect of Maharishi's teaching that I was deeply interested in. I probably first read it in the 1970s. And I've had a natural interest in books. My father was a writer. One of the things I think that deeply attracted me to the Bhagavad Gita was a connection I saw with my father's writing. I saw some themes in what he wrote that were a reflection of the very universal themes in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield, and it's about how to find freedom from conflict, how to find unity in life, how to make the right decisions and act in the best way for the evolution of everyone. The battlefield is the ultimate of lack of unity. It's the ultimate setting of conflict and extreme differences. So I think it's not a sort of mistake in a sense, of course not, that the Bhagavad Gita is set on a battlefield, because it is symbolic in a way of all the challenges people face in the world of differences and in the world of conflict. And it really poses the universal question of how can I act well? How can I act in a way that's good for the evolution of life, for myself and for others in this situation of extreme conflict? And of course, in Maharishi's commentary, he offers a master key solution for that, that the way to be able to deal with diversity is to go inward to the field of unity, that the field of being or transcendental consciousness within is like a field of unity that brings resolution to all the outer conflicts. Now, my father's, the main books he published, it's considered a classic of World War II literature. It was published in 1956 and is still in print. It's about his experiences in a very destructive phase of World War II, bomber command over Europe, and the loss of a lot of friends, and posing questions like, how do we, what's right action in a situation like this? How did we get to be in this situation? What's the web of cause and effect that leads to this sort of, terrible situation, and how can we prevent it in future? And I think that how can we prevent it in future was a big influence for me in both teaching TM, teaching at MIU, and also specifically teaching the course on the Bhagavad Gita. That was rather a long answer, but I think that's one of the deep things that attracts me to. And I find, like with the group you were in, there's such universal principles about life in the Bhagavad Gita, even in spite of it being from, maybe thousands of years ago. It's so relevant, isn't it? I think every time we have a course, whether it's the online course like you did or in person here, people feel that sense of, yes, this is helping me resolve deep questions I've got about life and how to move forward and how to contribute and how to act rightly in a very often confusing world. So I just think it still has such relevance, and there's something to me about reading something so sort of ancient and timeless, and yet it still speaks to us today. There's just something so profound about that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to hear the connection to your father's experience in World War II. And as we record this on October 1st, 2024, as fighting has broken out between Israel and Iran. It's just as relevant as ever.
Just the big need, the same as ever for prevention, but it's tipping over beyond that again at the moment. Even in the midst of conflict, we can still, and it's wonderful to know there are, right at the moment, very big groups of TM meditators and, people doing the advanced techniques, the TM City program. There are people going to India to teach thousands of people, and big groups forming in the Himalayas with a group of women there, and in other places in India. And Bali too, many meditating schools in Bali. So much is still happening to implement the technologies that Maharishi talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. He really says the essence of the Bhagavad Gita is to transcend, to go beyond the field of change. And of course, we can do that through the transcendental meditation technique in such a natural, effortless way. It's really Maharishi's contribution to the world to say that transcending and experiencing enlightenment isn't difficult. Anyone can do it. And because of that, it can be a workable peace technology. And actually, my father practiced TM, and later in his life, he saw that it really was something that could prevent war. And he was moved by that. He visited MIU and saw the domes and thought, this is something that can really help prevent war in the future. So we just have to implement it more widely and more completely.
Absolutely. You mentioned the techniques and the knowledge that Maharishi brought out. And, I think for a lot of folks who aren't as familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, you can think of the fact of the Bible and how theologians over thousands of years have interpreted it and written different commentaries. So I'd love to get your thoughts on Maharishi's commentary on the Gita in particular, and maybe how that differs from some of the other translations or commentaries other folks may be familiar with.
Yes, of course, there's so many, both commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita and translations of the Bhagavad Gita too, into really hundreds of languages. And I think the earliest, because the Bhagavad Gita was originally in Sanskrit, but the earliest translations were into other Indian languages. And then in the 1500s, it was translated into Persian. And then, of course, later than that, all the European languages. And as Maharishi has said in his introduction to his own translation and commentary, he said a lot of commentaries bring out a particular path of development, whether it's the path of action or the path of devotion or the path of knowledge. But he says that his reason for writing another commentary is to bring out a master key that opens the doors to all those paths, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, and the path of action, that anyone can develop in all those different ways. And of course, he locates the sort of master key, as he calls it, in chapter 2, particularly verse 45 and verse 48, you might remember from your studies. And verse 45, there's a phrase in there, Nistraigunyo Bhavajana. Arjuna is the main protagonist of the Bhagavad Gita. And the words are from Lord Krishna, who's known as an embodiment of the divine or of the absolute. And he's saying to Arjuna, be without the three gunas. The three gunas in Vedic teaching are the three qualities of action. So to be without them or be beyond them is to be without action. Being without action is being silent or being completely still. So that's the verse, that Nistraigunyo, chapter 2, verse 45, where Maharishi pinpointed that Krishna is teaching Arjuna about transcending, go beyond activity. Because if you can go beyond the field, activity has to take place in the field of diversity and differences. And if you're only in the field of differences, you can end up having conflict and fighting because you become, when someone's different from you, you might feel threatened by it, or there's conflicting desires, as we see, whether it's desires over land or ways of structuring a society, which we see, very clearly today, that conflict, deep-seated conflict over, different cultures feeling they have a claim to the same geographical area. And if you only remain in the field of conflict, and in the field of differences or the field of action, it's hard often to find a solution on that level. Whereas whether the people directly involved or other people influencing the collective consciousness can settle down more to a deep level of inner unity and bring that influence back out into the world so that more unifying qualities are enlivened in world consciousness, which, of course, from the time Maharishi started teaching transcendental meditation, he had the goal to help individuals relieve suffering, but he also had the goal to relieve suffering in the world. And by introducing more harmonizing, unifying values from within, I think it's a United Nations saying that peace begins in the mind, or war. Is it war or peace? Did they say it? That war begins in the minds of men, of course, by men meaning all humanity. And also that's how we have to create peace as well, from within the human mind, whether it's the individual human mind or large groups together creating an influence of peace. So I think all those things come out in the Bhagavad Gita. There's discussion particularly you might remember in the commentary on chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, because there it's sort of setting the scene for the discourse between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, and Arjuna's outlining all his perception of all the problems he's facing. And of course, the big problem is he's facing the violence of war, and he doesn't, he's a good person and doesn't want to be involved in that. Actually, in the whole context, the Bhagavad Gita, as you probably remember, is from a longer text called the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata chronicles the various conflicts within a family over several generations in terms of rulership and establishing good life in the society of the kingdom. It's a typical conflict between sort of greed and wanting power. There's the branch of the family that are wanting to grab control of power, whereas the other branch of the family wanting to establish a more balanced sort of leadership. So it's the classic conflict between good and evil, or good and destructive forces. And at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, it's come to the point where, in spite of a lot of efforts to create peace, a war is about to break out. That's on the level of the story. Of course, we can look at the Bhagavad Gita either as a story or a source of universal wisdom. It's also, as we discussed in our course, even just Maharishi really emphasized with all the Vedic literature that the sounds of the recitation of the Vedic literature by the pundits trained in that also has a very good effect in the environment. So there's many different levels of
yeah. And I'd love to dive into that point because, I think for, almost everybody, when they think of the idea of literature, right, they think of a physical book and, a story that someone told at some point. But, as you brought out in our course, and I think I've got the list here. So the Bhagavad Gita can be studied as an epic story, a classic of world literature, a discourse on the nature of life, a beautiful poem or song, sounds recited by Vedic pandits, impulses of intelligence in our physiology, an aspect of the Vedic literature, and as vibrations of consciousness knowing itself. So could you expand on what all that means?
It's a lot of different levels, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
We think of literature as a book. That's, if you study English literature, you read a lot of books. And of course, the Vedic literature has its reality as books too, on one level. And when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi sometimes spoke, he would have, if he was in a place where it was possible, he would have the books of the Vedic literature even on the stage. But if we read them in translation, we're really only reading the consciousness of the translator. And of course, many books have stories in them, or Maharishi even called the Bhagavad Gita a historical account, actually an account of events that happened. So there is that sort of outer reality of a book as a record of something and as a record of the words of Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield. But with the Vedic literature, Maharishi has also brought out the value of just the sounds themselves, that the initial expression of the Veda and Vedic literature is from deep within consciousness. It's not like just an individual author sitting down and writing a story he makes up. It's some deep cognition of some deep laws of nature that function deep within our own consciousness. Our consciousness is connected to, it's an expression of nature. We might feel as though our intelligence is individual, but individually we don't know how to make a brain work, or individually we don't know how to make our digestive system digest a meal. Nature's doing all of that, so nature's intelligence, if we can call it that, sort of works through us. And very pure, very clear consciousness, just like if you're on a river that's very still and very clear, you can see right down to the depths, and you can see maybe the rocks at the bottom. Similarly, if consciousness is very clear, we can see deeply into the functioning of the laws of nature. The Vedic rishis, the original seers of the Veda and Vedic literature, were able to see deeply into the functioning of nature and express that as these very pure sounds of Veda and the Vedic literature. Originally, the whole Veda and Vedic literature wasn't written down in books. It was an oral tradition. And the recitation that we can still hear today by the pundits who are trained in this are the original sounds that have been handed down through generations for many thousands of years. So a really precious tradition for the world. And yes, Maharishi certainly emphasized that even hearing those sounds, even without understanding the meaning, just the sound, almost more like music. That's why even thinking the word Gita means song. Bhagavad Gita is song of the Lord. So even just thinking of listening to the sounds of the recitation of the Bhagavad Gita without having to think about the meaning has a very nourishing effect, because they're sounds of a very deep level of nature. So that's kind of that deepest level of benefiting. But of course, we also have Maharishi's wonderful translation and commentary, and all the other translations and commentaries read by thousands of people around the world and appreciated on the level of meaning. But the unique feature of Maharishi's translation and commentary is bringing out this master key of effortless transcending, so that anyone can access the path of knowledge, devotion, and action, and sort of live an integrated life. That's really what the knowledge is for integration in practical life. Yeah. I think our group of students, when you did the course, and most of all of our courses, people really see that practical value, I think, don't they? People say, it's helpful even in my decision making, and working out what to do in life to be of maximum benefit for oneself and the whole world. We all have that challenge, how to live in a world of outer conflict, and hopefully be able to reduce the conflict. Of course, that's our goal. I don't think anyone really wants war, but it bubbles up anyway when stress levels become so high.
And one thing I wanted just to dive in a little deeper for folks who aren't familiar with Maharishi Vedic Science. And, in our modern Western paradigm, people tend to still think of the world as fundamentally physical, right? And that we live in a world of matter, even though we know that in the realm of quantum physics, there is no such thing as materiality. And, correct anything I'm about to say incorrect. But what Maharishi brought out is that, in fact, there's, the absolute nature of reality, what we call today the unified field of all the laws of nature. And that from that field, we manifest in this realm of diversity through sounds, of which the Vedic literature are those primordial sounds, which serve as the structure and function of this realm of the relative.
I think you've just explained it very well.
Thank you.
I just recently took a break from, I've been teaching Bhagavad Gita courses, one course after another, but just in the last few weeks, I've taught a short course where we were reading Dr. Tony Nader's new book that came out earlier this year, Consciousness is All There Is. And I think we all loved plunging into that. I was teaching a group of our on-campus students. And he brings out, of course, just what you're saying, that it's as though contemporary physics is just pushing us towards, understanding that the whole of nature is really vibrations of an underlying field. And it's not completely mathematically pinned down yet exactly what that field is. But as Dr. Nader, who himself is an MD and PhD in neuroscience, explains, in general, physicists would agree that the whole of material existence comes from an underlying abstract field, which ultimately is unified at its source. And that includes our subjective nature and the objective world. And of course, Dr. Nader's book is putting forward the paradigm, a new paradigm that's saying that everything is actually made of consciousness. It's been thought for, maybe hundreds of years that the brain produces consciousness, but he's proposing, based on Vedic science, really, he says in his book, based to some extent on the philosophy of Vedanta in Vedic science, that in fact the brain is more like a reflector of consciousness. Just like if we have a radio and it's playing music and it's picking it up from a radio station, if you smash the radio, you can no longer hear the music, but that doesn't mean the music has disappeared. The radio is like the transducer. And he's saying in a similar way, there's a universal field of consciousness, which physics is moving closer to identifying. And our brain reflects that universal field of consciousness. And of course, how the functioning of our brain then affects the music that we project from our brain, or the experience we have, and how orderly or coherent or functional our brains are. Of course, the brain is important, but that it's more of a reflector than an actual creator of consciousness. So, yes, Dr. Nader's book is fascinating, discussing what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which was first expressed by an Australian philosopher, David Chalmers. And the hard problem of consciousness is to try to explain how does matter give rise to the experience of consciousness. Dr. Nader's reversing that and saying matter doesn't give rise to consciousness. Consciousness is pre-existing and the brain just reflects. Well, not just reflects. Obviously, it's a very powerful reflector and very, the brain has a profound influence on the quality of consciousness we experience and project, but still that the basic nature of consciousness isn't dependent on the brain. But yeah, it's a wonderful book to read because it puts a lot of that understanding in terms of sort of contemporary science and philosophy, and really brings it together in a way that helps understand some of the ancient wisdom that is in some branches of what's called the Vedic literature.
Yeah, I loved that book. I started TM about 6 months before enrolling at MIU. And my TM teacher had recommended that to me because, I come from very much of like the materialist scientific background. Like I just, didn't think much about philosophy or religion. And then I read that book and it totally blew my mind. And I was like, all right, I got to enroll at NYU.
Yeah, you must have read there was an earlier version of it that was an ebook, because that was
exactly, the Kindle version. Yeah.
And now it's come out. I think it's got a slightly different title. I think the one you read was called One Unbounded Ocean, available as an ebook, and now it's come out in a revised and updated form called Consciousness is All There Is. And yeah, it's available as a hardback book now, which a lot of people still seem to enjoy reading hardback books, which is good. I mean, print books. Hard copy. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Even though there are advantages to ebooks and they're maybe more portable on a device and you can search them, but there's still something about holding a book in your hand. Yeah.
Totally. So back to the Bhagavad Gita, with regards to the beginning of the story and kind of the central structure of the book, as you mentioned, it takes place on a battlefield and it starts off with Arjuna having this major conflict in his heart and mind with regards to, as you said, doing what he's meant to do, taking that path of action, but also feeling deep compassion for his family members on the other side of the battlefield and not wanting to murder and recognizing that killing is a sin. So I'd love if you would expand on that and how Lord Krishna helps him to navigate that internal conflict.
Yes, it's actually very interesting you describing that conflict that Arjuna is in at the beginning, because it is very much a conflict between heart and mind, isn't it? And it's interesting the way Maharishi analyzes it in his commentary. He says that right at the beginning, the events that are happening as the Bhagavad Gita opens, Arjuna is charging out onto the battlefield ready to go. And as Maharishi analyzes it, Krishna saw that Arjuna was acting partly out of anger, and anger is not a good basis for action. And so Krishna wanted to create a situation where Arjuna was receptive to wisdom, the great wisdom of enlightenment in life. And to do that, it's very interesting. He just says one sentence, basically, and he calls, "Behold, O Partha, these Kurus gathered together." The name, calling Arjuna Partha, it's actually a name of Arjuna's mother. So by calling him that name, he enlivens Arjuna's love for his mother, and also saying, "See all these Kurus gathered together," because the Kurus is the extended family, and they're gathered together. So when a family's gathered together, it's ideally not for war. So with those two things, reminding him of his mother and saying, here's the whole family gathered together, he sort of triggers this heartfelt response in Arjuna. And yes, he's caught between his duty as a protector of society, his duty to protect society from aggression, and his love of his kinsman. And that conflict actually immobilizes him. And Maharishi describes so beautifully in the commentary that heart and mind can each be fully developed, but if they're not coordinated with each other, then we may be suspended and not able to act. If the mind is pulling in one direction and the heart in another direction, and they're not well coordinated, then that can completely interfere with the ability to act at all. And I think a lot of people recognize this. So many people say, oh, maybe not as extreme as the situation Arjuna's in, but they've had situations where their mind or their sense of responsibility tells them one thing and their heart tells them something else, how to decide. Now, of course, ultimately, in the Bhagavad Gita, the solution is to transcend both, to go to the field of unity, and where that's the basis of both heart and mind. Create more harmony between the heart and the mind so that action can be. And one of the other key verses in chapter 2 says, established in being, perform action. So being, capital BEING, being as that state of restful alertness in the mind, where the mind settles down to a quiet, very quiet, unbounded level. Sometimes it's translated established in yoga, because yoga is that state of unity within, or established in the self. That's like the deepest nature of our self. If we can go to our own deepest nature, which is that unbounded, unified level of life, then the heart and mind from there become more coordinated, and we can manage to resolve situations, both inner, like the inner conflict of heart and mind, but both levels of conflict can be resolved by going to that field of unity and then acting from there, because action from there is spontaneously more supportive of life, because it's from a level of wholeness. It's not from just one part of life, or, the heart or the mind or this country or that country. It's from a level of wholeness of life. So if you can act from that level of wholeness, then you can act in a way that's more supportive of everyone. And that's so much what we need, isn't it? At the moment, to bring peace, you have to have solutions that are supportive of everyone. Everyone deserves a peaceful life and a secure life. And, we don't, suffering isn't something that, by definition, suffering isn't something human beings enjoy. And we shouldn't be inflicting it on each other. But so we just so much need more of the unifying value. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Lovely question.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting that seed of conflict with Arjuna right in the beginning, that heart and mind thing.
I think that's something pretty much everyone can relate to.
It's so amazing that human dilemmas are so universal, even right through the ages, that what someone might face on a battlefield thousands of years ago, people think, yeah, well, I've had experiences like that. Exactly. Hopefully for most of us, it's not literally on a battlefield, but we can still feel that life itself is a bit of a battlefield of conflicting forces. I think most people have that experience at some time, don't we?
Yes, definitely.
It's a timely topic at the moment. I think, there's so much desire that the two really, major conflicts in the world at the moment, for them to find a way to resolution. And I think if we can get these big groups of people doing TM and its advanced programs, that's a huge contribution. Of course, all the other things have to happen as well, but if collective consciousness is more harmonious and more peaceful inherently, it makes it easier for negotiations to be successful and for solutions to be found, so that countries can work out how, and countries and cultures and religions can find a way to coexist peacefully. I think we all want that, but yeah.
So you mentioned a couple of the verses in chapter 2, which Maharishi describes as, the soul of the Bhagavad Gita. And so I'd love to spend a little bit more time on some of those verses in chapter 2 in general. And, he touches on the idea that chapter 2 has both theoretical or samkhya and practical knowledge or yoga.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yes, well, it's interesting. I always think it's a little bit like when we teach TM. We do give some kind of introduction to people first, like a theoretical understanding. If you're going to learn anything practical, someone will probably give you some explanation first, and then you go on to the practical things. And it's very much like that in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, that it starts with Chapter 2 actually starts with Arjuna still talking about the terrible dilemma he faces. But then once Lord Krishna starts to speak, which is, I think, in about verse 11 of chapter 2, he starts with giving an understanding of there being a field of life that is unmanifest and abstract and eternal, underlying everything that we see in the world. And that's called the Sankhya section. Sankhya is a system of Indian philosophy that analyzes the nature of reality more intellectually. And it's a very, very beautiful section where I'll read just a couple of verses of it. There never was a time when I was not, nor you, nor these rulers of men, nor will there ever be a time when all of us shall cease to be. As the dweller in this body passes into childhood, youth, and age, so also does he pass into another body. This does not bewilder the wise. It goes on for quite a few pages. Now, in this verse, it uses the word him, but him is not it's not referring to an individual person. It's referring to the state of being, the self within that we can all experience as him. Weapons cannot cleave him, nor fire burn him. Water cannot wet him, nor wind dry him away. He is uncleavable. He cannot be burned. He cannot be wetted, nor yet can he be dried. He is eternal, all-pervading, stable, immovable, ever the same. He is declared to be unmanifest, unthinkable, unchangeable. Therefore, knowing him as such, you should not grieve. It's such a beautiful statement of an eternal nature of life that's within all of us and that is deeper than what we see on the outside. It's not on the obvious level. It's hidden away. And all great spiritual traditions and religions talk about this, that there's a deeper life isn't just what we see on the surface. There's this deeper, more, in a way, more pure level of life that it isn't destroyed when the body is destroyed. And of course, different traditions express that in different ways, that idea that there's some underlying aspect of life that is eternal and everlasting. And so that's the intellectual understanding of the nature of reality that's given in the first part of Krishna's discourse. And then at a certain point, he says, now you've heard it in terms of Sankhya, now hear it in terms of yoga. And as Maharishi says, it's through yoga that knowledge steps into practical life. So the section on yoga has the 3 verses that Maharishi really pinpointed as key verses. Chapter 2, verse 40, which says that in this yoga, no effort is lost. And so in that, the commentary to that verse, Maharishi talks about effortless transcending, where no effort is needed for the mind to experience that inner unbounded state. And then the other 2 verses we've already talked about. So really it's more like then this is a technique for living, is go beyond activity, experience the inner self, and act from that state of unity.
Yeah. Wow. And, as you're describing that state of being and that eternality, I can't help but think of the concept of death and how a lot of this is really about conquering that fear of death that is so pervasive for us and recognizing that there is this field of eternality that we don't need to fear death because of that. And I think, that's how, for me, on one level, I can reconcile a lot of the conflicts that Arjuna is going through because, yes, obviously killing is a sin and you should never murder, and understand his concern for his family. But at the end of the day, right, when you think about reality from that higher level, you recognize that even that is just another aspect of the relative, and it's all part of this experience. And there are times where it's necessary to defend the good and what is right in the world.
I think you've expressed it beautifully. And of course, yes, fear of death is one of the big challenges of human life, isn't it? Because here we are in what seems to be the most real world, and even though on some level of understanding, we know it's the expression of something much, much deeper. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. And certainly in Maharishi's commentary, he says very clearly at one point, using the word sin to maybe mean, life damaging or destructive. He says very clearly, killing is sin. And even though, Arjuna's faced with having to fight because of there being aggression against society, in a sense, he's being forced by collective consciousness to act in a way that, immediately he doesn't want to have to perform that action. But in the bigger perspective, even that is somehow according to what the collective consciousness of his time has structured. And if he can rise above that field of change, he can see the bigger perspective and can see how nature's actually guiding him. But it's only from the level of a sort of enlightened perspective, on a bigger span of time and history and change and generational change. And, the generations are coming and going all the time. There are those waves of change. So if we can be more established in that bigger reality, then even death no longer has such a grip. And I think that's what is brought out in the Sankhya section. And many great saints and philosophers and religious leaders in all traditions have come to that same sort of insight, that we're part of a much bigger pattern of life than we generally know about in our limited individuality, and that by opening our awareness to more universal values, we go beyond that. We can go beyond that fear of, it's really a fear of change. Death is on the relative level of the level of change for an individual human being. Seems like the ultimate change. And yet in another way, it's part of a much bigger pattern.
Yeah. Did Maharishi ever comment on where in the Yuga cycle the events of the Bhagavad Gita take place?
I don't know whether he comments on it, not in the commentary on the first 6 chapters anyway. It may be what we studied in your class and what we've been talking about tonight is a commentary just on the first 6 chapters. But there are 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. And Maharishi didn't complete commentary on all 18 chapters, but he did do a lot of the later chapters. So there may be something in one of the later chapters. They're not, widely available yet. They can be studied through a special course that Dr. Tony Nader has designed. But in time, I'm sure they will become more widely available. Though it is generally said that the events of the Bhagavad Gita were like at the beginning of this era we're in now, which is called Kali Yuga, which is a time when there's more stress and more destructive tendency. But, Maharishi was confident that we could create a better time in the midst of that there was a little window to have what he called Sat Yuga, which is the more creative time, more constructive and creative and blissful and joyful time. He was confident we could have a window of that even in this era. Because, of course, even when you think of those long eras of time, it's still within time. So if we can go sort of beyond time to a timeless, eternal level, then in a sense, that infinite bliss and expansion and sort of perfect balance of life is always there. It's just how much we can experience it and actualize it in human life.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So then moving on to chapter 3, Maharishi explains a lot about the ideas of action and non-action, concepts like yagya and dharma. And I would just love to get your thoughts on, what those ideas are and what are some of the knowledge that's brought out in that chapter 3.
Yes, chapter 3 definitely is more focused on different types of action. And as you said, 2 of those types of action are dharma, and dharma meaning dharma is really the power that upholds evolution. And it can be thought of individually as action that's most natural for us, that it's like our duty, our path, what action we perform individually that will contribute the most we can, and it'll be in accord with our own nature. So Dharma has that individual meaning, but it also has the meaning of generally the force of evolution, the power that upholds evolution and growth in life. So, chapter 3 has beautiful sections on the nature of Dharma, and it also goes into what's called yagya, which yagya is also defined as action for evolution, but in a slightly different way. It's more a specific action for evolution. Like you could say, in a sense, that sitting down to practice TM every day is a little yagya. It's a performance. It's something you do. You sit down and you do it. You find a comfortable chair and you sit down and close your eyes. And a yagya is more like a performance. And in the Vedic tradition, it's a traditional performance with recitation and with, certain things that are a fire and certain things that are offered. But the underlying idea of a yagya is that it's to enliven through the use of Vedic sound and performance, very subtle laws of nature, to bring more support. And Maharishi did establish a whole system of yagya, that people can have a yagya done for them by the Vedic experts in that, to remove obstacles in life, to help remove stress, whether it's individual stress or societal stress. That the whole system of Maharishi Yagya that Maharishi developed is, again, another way to help create world peace. So by helping resolve stress at a very deep level through the use of Vedic sound, Maharishi describes chapter 3 as expanding on verse 48 in chapter 2, which is established in yoga, perform action, yogastha kuru karmani. Karmani is action. So then chapter 3 goes into action more, the nature of action, both as dharma and as yagya. Its chapter 3 is called karma yoga, which is the yoga of action.
One of the most meaningful lessons I took from Maharishi's commentary, and I can't remember if it was chapter 3 or elsewhere, but it relates to what we were talking about earlier with regards to death, and effectively that death is not something to be feared, because if we die, we just continue our karmic journey in the next lifetime. But actually the greater danger lies in following the dharma of another and not your own.
Yes, that's right. There's actually a verse. It's actually, I think, a verse of the Bhagavad Gita itself that says to perform action during our lives that isn't suited for our evolution is actually more of a danger than death itself. I can't remember the exact words of the verse, but it is actually a verse of the Bhagavad Gita. I have just located it here. A friend of mine did the index, because MIU did this edition here of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's a very good index. So, yes, that verse, it's verse 35 of chapter 3. Because one can perform it, one's own dharma, though lesser in merit, is better than the dharma of another. Better is death in one's own dharma. The dharma of another brings danger. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's really this idea of lesser in merit. I mean, you can imagine someone, maybe trying to be a brain surgeon when actually their skills are more suited to carpentry, and they could be much more successful in their life as a carpenter than as a brain surgeon. That idea that it's better to perform the action that's suited to our nature than to try to do something that we might think is of greater merit, but we actually can't do it very well, and it won't support our own evolution. That if we try to do something that isn't suited to our own skills and abilities, even if we, with all the education, everyone has some particular nature that's, more suited for one thing than another. And that it's evolutionary in life to find what And the way Maharishi in his commentary defines how we know what's more our dharma is that it's easier for us and it brings more joy. It's like, oh, I love doing this, and if you love doing it, it's not going to cause so much stress in the world. And it's a very interesting lesson, I think, isn't it? Something to think about
Totally.
again in the world when people are aspiring to maybe do things that cause them a lot of stress,
Absolutely.
Whereas someone else could do that role and love it.
Yeah. And I think that's very prevalent in this Kali Yuga, right? Where, folks aren't even necessarily familiar of the idea of Dharma, or if they are, they don't know how to connect to that higher state of being to find their Dharma. And so they get trapped in just, whatever their parents set out for them or whatever they think they need to do to survive from an economic standpoint. And, they just never find that true Dharma that brings that bliss consciousness.
Yeah. And I think that we're not really, at the moment, our Western societies particularly are not sort of functioning deeply in an evolutionary way. It's like the material world at the moment puts huge demands on people. So finding their path in life that's most rewarding may be difficult, or even if they know what it is, to implement it, because it's not sort of recognized that that's a good thing to do. Materialistically dominated world. And it's not that there's anything, material things are part of life and can be enjoyed, but, the well-being of human life also has to be at least equal, if not more, than the outer means. It's as though our outer means of living have become so dominant. But Maharishi wasn't against, he didn't say you had to give up material possessions to gain enlightenment. He was very much that you can enjoy the world and gain enlightenment, but just in a balanced way. And we've lost a lot of that balance, I think, in our societies as they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been taught that, it's all about hard work and grinding and go, 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 where Maharishi's like, no, it's actually the total inverse, right? Let nature unfold for you. Let it happen naturally and it'll appear.
Yes, and go in the direction of what brings you greatest happiness, right. That is actually a good thing to do. Of course, also being responsible and it's always balance, isn't it? It's finding the right balance. And material demands have just become so great that a lot of people are struggling to find some balance in their lives.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I think it's changing. I think your generation is, looking more for real, what is real and what is supportive for more people, what's just and what's... So I think there's a lot of hope. And
I agree. And, and I think you think about things like AI and, obviously there's certainly danger there, but I also think that if we can figure out how to automate all these processes in a way that's, not going to create technology that kills us. And we now have these new currencies where we can not have inflation eroding our wealth, then we actually can free up everyone's time to focus on developing those higher states of consciousness, right, to be in more life-supporting activities.
And maybe a big, something that individuals and societies can focus on, creating peace. There's so much to do in that way too. We see changes. There's so many more caring professions now where people have a role to look after other people and care for others and focus on their well-being. We just have to, create sufficient coherence in collective consciousness globally that can be for everyone, not just for the more affluent countries. I think that it's a big challenge of the world at the moment, is the huge discrepancies between the wealthy and the not wealthy countries. But I think your generation has more of you think more globally now than we used to. I mean, when I was growing up, communications just didn't allow you to think so globally. The Middle East seemed a long way away. It doesn't seem so far away anymore. It's part of our world family.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into chapter 4.
Oh, right.
So we get into the yoga of knowledge and the renunciation of action, and this idea that action and renunciation of action are two sides of the same coin. So I'd love to get your thoughts on all that.
Yes, no, that's a very profound point, isn't it? Because so much in the past, yoga has been associated with renunciation, and renunciation meaning giving up worldly possessions and going off and living in a cave or something. That's the sort of really traditional view of renunciation. And what Maharishi points out so profoundly is that renunciation isn't necessary for enlightenment. It may be a choice of lifestyle for some people. Some people may prefer to live in a more solitary life, a more simple life, not so engaged in worldly activities, a life of greater silence and inwardness. And, what Maharishi brings out so much is that at the deepest level, both those are just there. It's a choice in a way of life between. It's not that on the level of a way of life, renunciation isn't required for enlightenment. And yes, he brings out that really renunciation is the state of transcendence, that the real meaning of renunciation is when we go inward, actually sit down and close our eyes and allow the mind to go inward to a state of silence, that state of silence really is the real meaning of renunciation. It's a state, not a way of life. And in that sense, even the person who's very active in the world can also develop that inner state of renunciation. So in a sense, then it's called the yoga. Maharishi at one point says that yoga is union and renunciation is loss. And when we describe the process of transcending in TM, it's going from an active level of lots of thoughts and, engagement in the world and settling down to a very quiet, unbounded level. You can think of that either as union, which is yoga. You're becoming more experiencing the state of union within, or you can think of it as renunciation because you're losing the outside world by closing your eyes, letting your mind go in. It's like you're losing the outside world. So he says it's union and renunciation are like two sides of the one process. It's quite a deep point. It may be beyond, everyone can grasp immediately, but it's just a wonderful perspective on the real state of sannyasa or renunciation being the transcendent, where because it's an unbounded state without thought or action, it's like we've renounced all thoughts and actions. So we've got the essence of renunciation. Then we can come back out again and enjoy the outer world, but with that sort of inner freedom. Because I think the idea of renunciation on the outer level, like the tradition in many societies of monks and nuns, it's like a way of life that's free of possessions. It's a sort of simple life of freedom. But we can have the essence of that freedom more in the state of renunciation within, that it's a state rather than a path. We don't have to give up all our possessions, except 20 minutes twice a day when we transcend. Then we give up everything. We let it all go and go beyond. And then we have that inner freedom and bring it out with us into the world. So, yeah, it's quite a profound chapter. And it's called The Yoga of Knowledge of Renunciation of Action. And in this chapter, Maharishi emphasizes that it's the knowledge of renunciation. And so knowledge in that sense, knowing it in a pure state, in the state of transcendence.
Wow. And, this lesson was really meaningful to me specifically because, I think a lot of Vedic scholars have misinterpreted this lesson. And I certainly did when I had my spiritual awakening. The first time I read the Gita was a translation, not of Maharishi's, as before I came across his teachings. And, it presented me with this idea of detachment, right? And, I was misled that you had to detach from the material realm to have that spiritual advancement, and it I think in a lot of ways was actually more counterproductive.
Yes, because the thing is, we can read about descriptions of an enlightened state, and a person in higher states of consciousness where that inner unboundedness has become permanent and you're always experiencing it, naturally they experience a sense of sort of inner, it's like such inner fulfillment that there's a natural non-attachment to outer things. Even while they're enjoying the outer things, there's still that, it's an inner fulfillment. But the thing is, if you read about an enlightened person's experience and then you try to copy it, you're trying to be detached on the level of a mood more. I should be eating this apple pie but feeling detached from it at the same time. It's not really a very easy way to live. Whereas that natural state in what we call cosmic consciousness, when through regular transcending, you bring that unboundedness out with you until it becomes permanent, then it's just a natural state of non-attachments. You're not reminding yourself, I should be detached from this. It's that naturally that big unbounded awareness is there and you can still eat the apple pie, It's just that it's not so dominating in your mind anymore. It's not the be all and end all, because you've got this big inner fulfillment naturally there. It's a very profound point, isn't it? And it's interesting you had that, you went through that process of having that understanding initially to almost like just with your waking consciousness mind create a state.
Exactly.
And it's really just thinking about non-attachment. It's not real non-attachment. That's why this idea of renunciation as a state of experience, that you don't have to think about it. It's not that you're trying to be detached. It's that your inner unbounded awareness is so permanent and strong that it's just there naturally. It's like that's what the human brain can do. It can have unbounded bliss consciousness along with doing all the normal things in life. Then you don't have to try to remind yourself to be detached or non-attached. It's just that inner fulfillment is just there. Yeah. I think for a lot of people it's a relief to realize that that's the real meaning of non-attachment, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. It was definitely for me.
Was it? Yeah. And then, of course, too, once you have the experience of transcending and coming out back into activity, you realize, I feel that sense of inner freedom, at least for the first little time after I meditate. It's coming out with me. I feel it growing. And so then from experience that can grow more and more.
Yeah. And, that's another lesson that Maharishi brings out in this chapter that he also illustrates beautifully in the preface with some concrete examples. And that's, this loss and revival of knowledge over the sands of time and how we kind of have these ebbs and flows.
Yeah, that's right at the beginning of chapter 4, isn't it, where he talks about the concept of time in Indian history and how knowledge rises and falls, just like you said, how there can be big cycles of time where knowledge of how to live an enlightened life, like the full potential of human life, can be very lively, but then over time it slips away again. And one of the reasons he gives in his preface to the commentary is that one of the reasons for that slipping away in time is because of the difference in the state of consciousness between teacher and student. And I think it's partly why Maharishi in his time of teaching here on earth, he really put so much emphasis on people's development of consciousness. He wanted to have enlightened people and big enlightened groups as much as possible. So more emphasis on the practical effect than just on the theoretical understanding. Yeah. Just for that reason, because that's a way to try to safeguard that the knowledge of enlightenment in a natural universal form won't disappear too quickly.
Yeah. So then in chapter 5, he continues on with, the ideas of union and loss or renunciation being opposites, but again, just actually at the fundamental level being one and representative of an integrated life.
You've done your homework, haven't you?
I had a great teacher.
It's a wonderful chapter, chapter 5. It's the shortest in these 6 chapters, or maybe chapter 3 is shorter. It's so profound. It's called the Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the yoga of action and renunciation of action. So now bringing them both together, as the fully enlightened level of life. Yes, there's a lot in that chapter about, what is the state of enlightenment and how does that, I think it's in, that's chapter, I'm thinking of a particular verse, but it's actually in chapter 6, not chapter 5. So, but there is, I'm just turning over the pages in chapter 5. There's this lovely verse, he whose happiness is within, whose contentment is within, whose light is all within. That yogi, being one with Brahman, attains eternal freedom in divine consciousness. And Brahman there means totality, that wholeness of life. So, but it's beautiful that that's related to happiness and contentment, the happiness and contentment of enlightenment. I actually found that verse online once as a favorite quote of David Lynch, the film producer David Lynch. It's nice to think that he would enjoy that. He whose happiness is within, whose contentment is within, whose light is all within. Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of, I think, eternal life, you said, and, that brings up a concept we haven't talked about, but the whole idea of reincarnation and the cycle of life, which through the evolution of higher states of consciousness and the development of cosmic consciousness can be broken and transcended.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because certainly with our teaching of TM in the world in general, there's no expectation that people will buy into the idea of reincarnation. The technique itself is so universal. People can come from any culture or tradition. But it's fairly clear in the Bhagavad Gita that that's the sort of reality that the Bhagavad Gita was talking about, that we evolve through. If we haven't gained enlightenment at one opportunity, we'll have another opportunity. It's an ongoing process. But, I always think that Maharishi was once asked by a journalist, do you believe in reincarnation? He was asked. And he just said, reincarnation is for the ignorant. And I think Maharishi was so focused on, saying once you have a human body, make good use of it and fully develop it. And once you have a human brain and nervous system, you have the capacity for enlightenment. He actually didn't like to talk very much about reincarnation because I think he thought people would then think, oh, well, if not this time, next time, I'm a lost cause this time. He didn't want us to think we were a lost cause this time. It was very much, no, do it this time, go for the highest and don't feel that it's not worth the time and attention, which is the major thing, because I think he says somewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, I can't locate where this is, but that thinking too much about the possibility of reincarnation can lead to a fatalist kind of attitude. And that leads to a sort of loss of desire for enlightenment. People become sort of just fatalistic and a little bit passive about it, rather than making best use of the current physiology. If you start to think, oh, well, it may need so many lifetimes and I'll have another chance in the future. Whereas he was more like, no, go for it now, Why? You've got a human nervous system. That's the full potential of the human nervous system. Why not use it? So, but it is, that sense of, the ongoing power of evolution and force of evolution has its comforting value as well, I think.
Absolutely. It takes some of the pressure off.
In chapter 6, towards the end of chapter 6, Arjuna says to Krishna, what happens to someone who doesn't gain enlightenment in this lifetime? And I think the words in the verse itself, does he not perish like a broken cloud? And it's quite touching, like what does happen to a person who doesn't gain enlightenment in this lifetime. And of course the answer, I think it's verse 38. Yes, so Arjuna says to Krishna, deluded on the path to Brahman, it's verse 38 in chapter 6. O mighty armed, without foothold and fallen from both, does he not perish like a broken cloud? Thou art able to dispel this doubt. It is beautiful. And then in the reply, O Partha, there is no destruction for him in this world or hereafter, for none who acts uprightly, my son, goes the way of misfortune. Having attained the worlds of the righteous and dwelt there for countless years, he that strayed from yoga is born in the house of the pure and illustrious. Or he is born in an actual family of yogis endowed with wisdom, though such a birth as this on earth is more difficult to attain. There he regains that level of union reached by the intellect in his former body, and by virtue of this, O joy of the Kurus, he strives yet more for perfection. By that former practice itself, he is irresistibly borne on. Even the aspirant to yoga passes beyond the Veda. It's beautiful, that irresistibly borne on. But of course, I think if we can be irresistibly borne on in this lifetime, it's even better. And so many people, we don't ask them to give up this sense, feel that this lifetime is the only one. So definitely better make good use of it. It's. I think sometimes on those topics, Maharishi's feeling was, whatever we believe or don't believe, and we honour people's beliefs. He was always very respectful of people's own cultural beliefs and religious beliefs. But whatever we believe, the reality is what it is, and we'll discover that as we evolve.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So the first was with regards to, the 4 pillars of yoga, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha.
Yes. Well, that's an important section of chapter 6 when Maharishi goes into those different, what he calls the different pillars of yoga. But he has I'm just again opening up that section. It's verses 20 to 23. He defines dharma, again, just like we've been talking about, on the level of one's natural duty, and including all moral goodness, right action, freedom, justice, and lawfulness. So that's the sort of expressed value in a way of that power of evolution acting in accord with our natural duty. Artha is to do with wealth and business, advantage, reward and gain. And kama is desire, which Maharishi says desire naturally aims at happiness and the removal of suffering. All aspirations on this level are satisfied when the man realizes the eternal bliss of the self. And this is something that runs right throughout the Bhagavad Gita, that the ultimate fulfillment of desire is pure bliss consciousness. And once we can establish bliss consciousness, then it's as though all desires is fulfilled. So we're no longer bound by individual desires. If we lost the desire to eat food, then we wouldn't last very long. So, life continues, and there's that desire and aspiration to enjoy more and do more. But on the ground of infinite bliss consciousness that's established in enlightenment, we're just not. You may remember there was a description of enlightenment I think it's in chapter 2, where Maharishi says it's as though all the desires in the mind have been thrown upwards to the surface. If we think of the mind like the ocean, that desires are no longer so deeply gripping in the mind. They've gone more to the surface. They're still there, but we're just not so gripped by them. We're free from that cycle of action, impression, and desire. And what we desire and what we enjoy is more what's good for our evolution. It's more like action in accord with natural law. And then the fourth pillar is moksha, or liberation. So Maharishi analyzes there how a series of verses each address those 4 pillars, what he calls 4 pillars of yoga. Oh, yes, there it is. He says that the verses 20 to 23 that talk about those 4 aspects, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, he says those verses 20 to 23 are the 4 pillars of the edifice of yoga. They stand to remind men of every generation that it is not necessary to suffer in life, that life's goal is easy to attain, and that all aspirations are easy to fulfill. That's the amazing reality that Maharishi brought out about effortlessness of the process of enlightenment, something that people have struggled after for so many generations. But the more you struggle, the further away it tends to become. It's a great blessing to think that the path to enlightenment could be one of effortlessness and increasing bliss, and then that gaining support from the huge organizing power of nature, so that desires are more in accord with your own well-being and everyone else's well-being, and more easily fulfilled. So all the struggle to attain enjoyment in life is replaced by a natural state of inner fulfillment and support of nature. Good luck. Things happening more easily.
Yeah, spontaneous right action.
Yeah. A very wonderful concept. If more people understood that idea that there's a possibility of thinking and acting spontaneously in accord with natural law, that we have like that. I heard Maharishi just recently say it's like we have that huge cosmic computer in our awareness that can really support every thought and action. But so many people just don't wake it up, We just use a small proportion of our consciousness. So it's the whole new consciousness paradigm that everyone should live the full potential of their intelligence and consciousness, not just some small aspect of it.
Yeah. Now, when I interviewed Dr. Sands, we talked quite a bit about the 8 limbs of yoga.
Yes.
And I'd be curious, do you have a perspective on how the 8 limbs of yoga relate to the 4 pillars of yoga?
Well, I think Maharishi is just using that expression, the 4 pillars of yoga, as a specific way to talk about those verses and those qualities. I don't think, because the 8 limbs of yoga are so embedded in the nature of yoga philosophy brought out by the sage Patanjali. Maybe those 4 aspects, the dharma, kama, moksha, and artha, maybe they're like goals in some way. But I haven't heard Maharishi make a connection, so I wouldn't like to hazard.
Yeah, sure.
But definitely the 8 limbs of yoga. They're mentioned, I think, in the preface in Maharishi's preface to, yes, he says in his preface that the yoga philosophy of Patanjali was itself misinterpreted and the order of stages on its eightfold path reversed. The practice of yoga was understood to start with yama niyama, which is, right action, rules of action, and so on, this, as Maharishi calls them here, the secular virtues, when in reality it should begin with samadhi. Samadhi is the eighth limb of yoga. And, usually in yoga teaching, samadhi you can only hope to attain after many years of performing right action. And what's called the yamas and the niyamas lay out all the rules for right action. So it can be a very long process before you reach samadhi because you have to perfect all the other 7 steps or stages or limbs first. And Maharishi sort of turned it around and said the original meaning was to go to samadhi directly, transcend directly, and then all the other limbs grow together simultaneously. Yeah. So I think that's about the only mention of the 8 limbs in the Bhagavad Gita commentary itself. I'm just looking at our index to see if Patanjali gets any other mentions, but I think that might be. But it's a wonderful discussion in the preface itself. Maharishi's preface to his translation and commentary is such a wealth of knowledge about the rise and fall of knowledge, how different teachers come and then how that knowledge gets misinterpreted. And it's so interesting, the different reasons for loss of knowledge, one being that the transcendental value of life is in general hidden beneath the material world. So because it's hidden, it gets forgotten. Like the foundation of a house might be forgotten because you don't see it on the outside. And another one is mistaking the cause for the effect. So when we were talking about the effect of enlightenment may be a state of natural non-attachment, but if you take that as the path instead and try to imitate that, then it's a very difficult process. Yeah.
So the final thing I wanted to ask you about with regards to chapter 6 was Krishna's final instructions to Arjuna, which were, therefore be a yogi. What did he mean by that?
Well, I think he just meant, engage in the practice, become an enlightened individual and everything that means of higher states of consciousness, not just cosmic consciousness, but the other higher states as well. I think Maharishi's final words in his commentary on that verse is to refer to what he calls the great union. And that's referring really to unity consciousness and, that state of complete union with all levels of creation, the outer relative world or the inner transcendental and the divine, whatever word or term or name might be used for that, but God consciousness or glorified cosmic consciousness that Maharishi describes as the 6th state is that appreciation of really this divine level of life on the level of experience, not on the level of belief. And then Brahman is the great totality that combines all levels, the relative and the absolute, and that he calls the great union. So being a yogi is to experience that great union. And of course, most of chapter 6 it's devoted to practice. So he's basically saying, engage in the practice, have the experience. And it is said that by the end of the 18 chapters that Arjuna had gained enlightenment. His practice was a little bit different, maybe because he was fortunate to have Krishna right there as his guide. By the end of the 18 chapters, he says, I have regained memory, smriti labdha, meaning memory of the self and memory of Brahman, of the totality. It's as though we forget that totality of life and just live in some small corner. But it's funny, it's interesting. Maharishi often used an analogy of the house for Brahman consciousness because it's like a totality, a big totality with many rooms and many parts. But, when you live in the house, you enjoy the whole house. And I think that analogy is so beautiful for life as a whole, that we should live the whole of life. We shouldn't just be in one small room. There's the whole big, huge sort of cosmic totality of life to live. There's the total laws of nature. There's nature's total functioning and really just cosmic intelligence. And we should live that cosmic intelligence, not just some small part. So I think that's basically what being a yogi is. It's to become an enlightened individual, a fully realized human being.
Don't be a fatalist. Don't get caught in that cycle of reincarnation. Yes, like enlightenment is your birthright in this lifetime.
Yes. Yep. Beautiful.
Wow. Well, Dr. Brown, this has been such a fun conversation.
Great. There's a lot to talk about with the Bhagavad Gita. I appreciate your depth of interest and going over some of those areas again.
Absolutely. And for folks who want to learn more on MIU Press, you can get the Maharishi's commentary.
Yes, it's available through MIU Press. It should also be available on Amazon, but I'm just not sure. If anyone just Googles MIU Press, it comes up right away and can be purchased there. And even I don't know how, is your podcast just within the US or?
It's international as well.
Because in the publisher the printers who print our MIU Press edition also print it in Europe and in Australia and a few other countries so that the shipping costs aren't so high. So it is fairly widely available, but it can be ordered through MIU Press online, and then MIU Press just the order goes through the printers in those other countries. It's also available as an ebook as well, the Bhagavad Gita. Both of Maharishi's books, Science of Being and Art of Living and Bhagavad Gita, are both available now as ebooks. But as we said before, a lot of people still like to have a book in their hands. So MIU Press, and if you just Google MIU Press, it comes up.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. Thanks for having such a long conversation. This has been a blast.
In this conversation, Dr. Sue Brown and I discussed Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's commentary on chapters 1 through 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. Maharishi described Chapter 2 as the soul of the Bhagavad Gita. He further located the central core of wisdom in 3 key verses of Chapter 2, verses 40, 45, and 48. As such, I wanted to share these verses in the commentary Maharishi provided. I'm honored that my friend and classmate Gita Vedanti recorded these verses in Sanskrit and English. Let's begin with Chapter 2, verse 40.
Neha Vikramanashosti Pratyavayo na vidyate Swalpamapyasya dharmasya Trayate mahato bhayat. In this yoga, no effort is lost and no obstacle exists. Even a little of this dharma delivers from great fear.
Obstacle. The Sanskrit word pratyavaya also means any reversal of progress or any adverse effect. Dharma signifies the path of evolution. The practice of yoga is a direct way to evolution. Through it, the individual mind gains the state of cosmic intelligence, that unbounded state of universal being which is the summit of evolution. Dharma is natural to man, and so is this practice of yoga, for it is in accordance with the very nature of the mind and brings fulfillment to life. This is why this yoga is the dharma of everyone. Lord Krishna's wonderful teaching in this verse brings great hope to mankind. On the way to eternal freedom, no effort is lost. Any effort on this path results in the goal. The process, having started, cannot stop until it has reached its goal. This is so in the first place because the flow of the mind towards this state is natural, for it is a state of absolute bliss and the mind is always craving for greater happiness. Therefore, as water flows down a slope in a natural way, so the mind flows naturally in the direction of bliss. Secondly, no effort is lost because for the mind to become blissful, no effort is needed. If effort were necessary, then the question of effort being lost would arise. When an action is performed, one stage of the process leads to another, which in turn gives rise to a further stage, so that when one stage has been reached, the previous stage is a thing of the past. In the performance of every action, therefore, some stage is lost, some energy is lost, some effort is lost. When the Lord says here that no effort is lost, it can only be because no effort is required. This means that Lord Krishna's technique of establishing the intellect in the absolute is based on the very nature of the mind. We must therefore inquire how the mind, motivated by its own nature, succeeds in gaining divine consciousness without effort. When a man is listening to music and a more beautiful melody begins to come from another source, his whole mind will turn to enjoy it. No effort is needed to shift the attention to the more charming melody. The process is automatic. There is no loss of energy between starting to listen and enjoying the music with rapt attention. This is the Lord's meaning. Since the field of eternal freedom is absolute bliss, the process of uniting the mind with it, once having begun, comes to completion without loss of energy or effort. It does not stop until the experience is full, for no obstacle exists. Seen from this angle, the very beginning of the process is its fulfillment, for it is the movement of the mind to bliss. The end is found in the beginning. The very start of the process brings the mind to the goal because, according to the Lord, there is no resistance on the way, there is no obstacle to surmount. It is a path of no resistance, a pathless path, a path whose goal is omnipresent. That is why a little of this delivers from great fear. Following the path of no resistance means that the technique of establishing the mind in the absolute has only to be started, and from that point deliverance from suffering follows. The very start in this direction relieves a man from great fear in life. To establish the mind in the absolute, says the Lord, very little, if anything, has to be done. This is because not even the natural direction of the mind has to be changed. The mind wanders from object to object, and it wanders not for the sake of the object itself, but for the possibility of happiness that the object provides. Thus it does not actually wander from object to object, but moves from a point of lesser happiness to a point of greater happiness. Since the greatest happiness is its goal, and the flow of the mind is already in the direction of greater happiness, the direction need not be changed. And since there is no need even to change the direction of the mind, it appears that nothing need be done to realize the goal. But the Lord says, a little of this practice. This shows that something has to be done. What is necessary is only to experience the increasing charm on the way to transcendental absolute bliss. As in the case of diving, one has only to take a correct angle and let go. The whole process is accomplished in an automatic manner. This is what the Lord means by a little of this. Just as the first ray of the sun dispels the darkness of the light, so the first step in this practice dispels the darkness of ignorance and fear. But although the first ray of the rising sun is able to dispel the darkness of the night, the sun continues to rise because its nature is not only to remove darkness, leaving the atmosphere dimly lighted, but also to shine forth its splendor and illuminate the whole earth. The glory of the sun is its full midday light. The Lord clearly means that the path of divine unfolding is so simple and natural that the process, once having been consciously started, encounters no obstacles. Quickly it produces an effect strong enough to enlighten the mind and release a man from all negativeness in life, from fear of the cycle of birth and death. This is a noble way of enlightening the aspirant. There is no confident assurance of results from the very beginning of this practical teaching. Arjuna is told the nature of the technique and the results that will follow from its practice so that he may know in advance what it involves. Realization is not something that comes from outside. It is the revelation of the self in the self by the self. This revelation cannot occur unless a man gives himself completely to it, and then it happens by itself. But in order to be able to give himself completely to it, he has to know at least two things. First, that it is within his power to accomplish, and secondly, that its accomplishment will be of use to him. This is why Lord Krishna speaks the words of this verse. Arjuna is being prepared for the direct experience of reality which wipes out all uncertainties and brings stability to life. The Lord proclaims to him the simplicity of the approach to the divine and at the same time describes its result. Why is it that in the modern world this spiritual practice has faded into the background of life? The answer lies in the wrong interpretation of verses such as this and the consequent spread of a misguided view of reality which has persisted for many centuries. Having explained the simplicity and effectiveness of the principles of establishing the intellect and the divine, the Lord in the following verses introduces the technique for its accomplishment. End quote. Maharishi would explain that technique, which he called transcendental meditation, as a practical way of establishing one's consciousness in a state of absolute bliss. That the mind is like an ocean of consciousness, and that through the practice of TM, one's mind wanders gently towards that field of absolute bliss at the depths. The use of a Sanskrit mantra helps to anchor the mind towards the field of pure consciousness, rather than attempting to quiet the waves on the surface of the mind as in other meditation techniques. Maharishi further proposed that through meditation, one could achieve a fourth state of consciousness, transcendental consciousness, or samadhi. Scientific research on the state of restful alertness has demonstrated a unique set of physiological functioning for meditators in TC. Finally, Maharishi proposed that through the repeated integration of transcendental consciousness with waking state consciousness, that experience of pure consciousness becomes permanently established, and the individual achieves a state of cosmic consciousness. In chapter 2, verse 45, Krishna explains the process for experiencing these higher states of consciousness.
Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna Nirdvando Nitya Sattvasto Niryogakshema Atmavan. The Veda's concern is with the three gunas. Be without the three gunas, O Arjuna, freed from duality, even firm in purity, independent of possessions, possessed of the self.
This is the technique of instantaneous realization. The Lord shows Arjuna a practical way of converging the many-branched mind into the one-pointedness of the resolute intellect. Here is an effective technique for bringing the mind to a state where differences dissolve and leave the individual in the state of fulfillment. Everything that has so far been said by Lord Krishna is to prepare Arjuna to understand this practice of bringing his mind from the field of multiplicity to that of eternal unity. This practice is to brighten all aspects of his life by bringing his mind to transcendental consciousness, the limitless source of life, energy, wisdom, peace, and happiness. It is to raise him to that cosmic status which harmonizes all the opposite forces of life. Modern psychological theories investigate causes in order to influence effects. They grope in darkness to find the cause of darkness in order to remove it. In contradiction, here is the idea of bringing light to remove darkness. This is the principle of the second element. If you wish to produce an effect on the first element, ignore that element, do not seek its cause, influence it directly by introducing a second element. Remove the darkness by introducing light. Take the mind to a field of happiness in order to relieve it of suffering. However, even if we accept that by investigating the cause it is easy to influence the effect, we shall find that this verse will serve our purpose, for it provides a technique by which the ultimate cause of all human life can be investigated. If knowledge of the cause can help to influence the effect, then knowledge of the ultimate cause of life will effectively put an end to all suffering. The greatness of Lord Krishna's teaching lies in its direct practical approach and its completeness from every point of view. The idea of introducing a second element and the idea of investigating the cause in order to influence its effect represents two principles distinctly opposed to each other, yet both of them are fulfilled in one technique. It is this completeness of practical wisdom that has made the Bhagavad Gita immortal. Lord Krishna commands Arjuna, be without the three gunas. Be without activity, be yourself. This is resolute consciousness, the state of absolute being, which is the ultimate cause of all causes. This state of consciousness brings harmony to the whole field of cause and effect and glorifies all life. Arjuna's main problem was to reconcile love of kinsmen with the necessity to root out evil. He was desperately seeking a formula of compromise between righteousness and evil. But on having explored all the avenues of his heart and mind, Arjuna could not find any practical solution, could not decide on any line of action. Lord Krishna, however, shows him the field where righteousness and love merge in eternal harmony, the eternal life of absolute being. The Lord makes clear to Arjuna that all influences of the outside world, and their consequences as well, will cling to him and affect him so long as he is out of himself, so long as he allows himself to remain in the sphere of relativity and under its influence. Once out of that sphere, he will find fulfillment in his own self. It is difficult for a man to improve his business affairs while he himself is constantly immersed in all their details. If he leaves them for a little while, he becomes able to see the business as a whole and can then more easily decide what is needed. Arjuna has a deep belief in Dharma. His mind is clear about considerations of right and wrong. But the Lord asks him to abandon the whole field of right and wrong for the field of the transcendent. There, established in a state beyond all duality, beyond the influence of right and wrong, he will enjoy the absolute wisdom of life, from which springs all knowledge of the relative world. And the Lord says to Arjuna, the field of that absolute wisdom is not outside you. You have not to go out anywhere to acquire it. It is within you. You have only to be within yourself, possessed of the self, ever firm in the purity of your being. Here indeed is the skill of bringing light to remove darkness. Arjuna is not asked to come or go anywhere. He is only asked to be without the three gunas. This instruction serves as a direct means to take man to the absolute state of his consciousness. It is enough for the Lord to say, be without the three gunas, O Arjuna, freed from duality. The entire creation consists of the interplay of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, born of prakriti or nature. The process of evolution is carried out by these three gunas. Evolution means creation and its progressive development, and at its basic lies activity. Activity needs rajoguna to create a spur, and it needs sattoguna and tamoguna to uphold the direction of the movement. The nature of tamoguna is to check or retard, but it should not be thought that when the movement is upwards, tamoguna is absent. For any process to continue, there have to be stages in that process, and each stage, however small in time and space, and needs a force to maintain it and another force to develop it into a new stage. The force that develops it into a new stage is sattoguna, while tamoguna is that which checks or retards the process in order to maintain the state already produced so that it may form the basis for the next stage. This explains why the three gunas have inevitably to be together. No one guna can exist in isolation without the presence of the other two. It is for this reason that the Lord asks Arjuna to be out of all the three gunas, to be entirely out of the influence of the forces that constitute life in the relative field. While giving him the wisdom of Sankhya, the Lord has told Arjuna that there are two aspects of life, perishable and imperishable. The perishable is relative existence, and the imperishable is absolute being. All life in the relative field is under the sway of the gunas. Therefore, in order to give Arjuna the direct experience of the absolute state of life, he asks him to be without the three gunas. There are gross planes of creation, and there are subtle planes. When the Lord says, be without the three gunas, he means that Arjuna should bring his attention from the gross plane of experience through the subtle planes and thus to the subtlest plane of experience. Transcending even that subtlest plane, he will be completely out of the relative field of life, out of the three gunas. So the Lord's words, be without the three gunas, reveal the secret of arriving at the state of pure consciousness. When you say to someone, come here, you imply by these two words that he must get up and begin to put one foot before the other, and that this walking on both feet will bring him to you. When the Lord says, be without the three gunas, he obviously means that in whichever field of the three gunas you have your stand, from there you are to begin moving towards subtler planes of the gunas, and, arriving at the subtlest, come out of it, transcend it, be by yourself, possessed of the self, freed from duality, ever firm in purity, independent of possessions. Lord Krishna in this verse has really given the technique of self-realization. Arjuna was held in suspension between the dictates of his heart and mind. The Lord suggests to him that he should come out of the conflict and he will then see his way clear. That is why, having said, be without the three gunas, he immediately adds, freed from duality, freed from the field of conflicts. The relative field of life is full of conflicting elements, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, and all the other pairs of opposites which constitute life. Under their influence, life is tossed about as a ship on the rough sea from one wave to another. To be freed from duality is to be in the field of non-duality, the absolute state of being. This provides smoothness and security to life in the relative field. It's like an anchor to the ship of life in the ocean of the three gunas. One gains steadiness and comfort. Arjuna was highly sensitive to right and wrong. For this reason, the Lord, after saying freed from duality, at once adds ever firm in purity. He wants to assure Arjuna that this state will always prove right in accordance with Dharma, ever furthering the process of evolution for the good of all. Nothing wrong can possibly result from it because that is the state of fulfillment. To convey this idea of fulfillment, the Lord says independent of possessions. The Sanskrit word used in the text is niryogakshema, which carries the meaning that in this state one is not required to think of gaining what one does not have or of preserving what one has. Duryodhana's desire to possess and preserve possessions is the cause of the battle. Even in the ordinary life of man, it is this tendency to possess that tempts him to go the wrong way. So the Lord tells Arjuna that he will transcend this cause of transgression in life. Thereby he also reminds Arjuna that Duryodhana could take the wrong path because he gained kingdom, pleasure, and power, but did not gain the wisdom of remaining independent of possessions. That is why possessions kept him bound to themselves and he lost his sense of proportion. By using this expression, independent of possessions, the Lord is providing the answer to Arjuna's own words in verse 32 of chapter 1. I desire not victory, O Krishna, nor a kingship, nor pleasures. Arjuna had seen how pleasure and power may ruin Lord Krishna in educating him in the art of independence in the midst of possessions, for after the battle Arjuna is going to be placed in a position of great wealth and power. Having said freed from duality, ever firm in purity, independent of possessions, the Lord then adds possessed of self. This is to indicate to Arjuna that this blessed state of life is not far distant from him. It is within himself and therefore always within his reach. And moreover, it is his own self, nothing other than his own self. There is great presence of mind, great skill in enlightening the ignorant, and the height of perfection in this style of this discourse. If you are told by someone, I will take you to the field of great wisdom and abundance of life, without some indication of where the field lies, you may well be puzzled about many things, about the distance, the difficulties on the way, your own ability to get there. That is why the Lord uses the words possessed of the self. Let yourself be possessed by yourself. Once you are possessed by yourself, the purpose of all wisdom has been achieved. There the Vedas end. That is the end of the journey of life. That is the state of fulfillment. For this reason, possessed of the self stands at the end of the verse. Here is a technique that enables every man to come to the great treasure house within himself and so rise above all sorrows and uncertainties in life. From this verse onwards, the entire teaching of the Bhagavad Gita proclaims the glory of achieving the state of the transcendent. It is this transcendent state of being which enables a man to become a karma yogi, one who is successful on the path of action. It is this that enables a man to become a bhakta, one who is successful on the path of devotion, and it is this that enables a man to become a jnani, one who is successful on the path of knowledge. This is the highway to the fulfillment of life's purpose. If a man wants to be a true devotee of God, he has to become his pure self. He has to free himself from those attributes which do not belong to him, and then only can he have one-pointed devotion. If he is enveloped by what he is not, then his devotion will be covered by that foreign element. His devotion will not reach God, and the love and blessings of God will not reach him. For his devotion to reach God, it is necessary that he should first become himself covered by nothing. Then the process of devotion will connect him directly with the Lord, thereby bestowing on him the status of a devotee. Only when he has become himself can he properly surrender to the great self of the Lord. If he remains in the field of the three gunas, in the many sheaths of gross and subtle nature, then it is these sheaths that prevent direct contact with the Lord. Therefore, the first step towards union through devotion is to be oneself. This, likewise, is the first step on the path of Jnana Yoga, the path of union through knowledge, and also on the path of union through action, Karma Yoga, because it is the state of transcendental consciousness that is the state of jnana, or knowledge, and that delivers from the bondage of karma. This state is also the basis of success in any field of life. The field of the three gunas is enlivened by the light of the absolute being beyond the gunas. The following verse shows that the purpose of all activity be fulfilled in this state of being. End quote. The glory of achieving the state of the transcendent. The Song of the Lord. To close, I'll share Maharishi's commentary on chapter 2, verse 48. In this verse, Krishna provides guidance about the need for action in the field of relative existence, having established oneself in a state of union with the divine. To shoot an arrow successfully, it is first necessary to draw back on the bow.
Yogastha kuru karmani Sangham tyaktva dhananjaya Siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva Samatvam yoga uchyate. Established in yoga, O winner of wealth, perform actions, having abandoned attachment and having become balanced in success and failure, for balance of mind is called yoga.
Established in yoga means established in cosmic consciousness. Yoga, or union of the mind with the divine intelligence, begins when the mind gains transcendental consciousness. Yoga achieves maturity when this transcendental bliss consciousness, or divine being, has gained ground in the mind to such an extent that, in whatever state the mind finds itself, whether waking or sleeping, it remains established in the state of being. It is to this state of perfect enlightenment that the Lord refers in the beginning of the verse when he says, established in yoga. Towards the end of the verse, he defines yoga with reference to action as balance of the mind. This balanced state of mind is the result of the eternal contentment which comes with bliss consciousness. It cannot be gained by creating a mood of equanimity and loss and gain, as commentators have generally thought. Yoga is the basis of an integrated life, a means of bringing into harmony the inner creative silence and the outer activity of life in a way to act with precision and success. Established in yoga, Arjuna will be established in the ultimate reality of life, which is the source of eternal wisdom, power, and creativity. Part of the training for one who wishes to become a good swimmer is the art of diving. When one is able to maintain oneself successfully in deep water, then swimming on the surface becomes easy. All action is the result of the play of the conscious mind. If the mind is strong, then action is also strong and successful. The conscious mind becomes powerful when the deeper levels of the ocean of mind are activated during the process of transcendental meditation, which leads the attention from the surface of the conscious mind to the transcendental field of being. The process of diving within is the way to become established in yoga. When the Lord says that having been through this process, Arjuna should come out and act, he gives him the mechanics of successful action. To shoot an arrow successfully, it is first necessary to draw back on the bow, thus giving it great potential energy. When it is brought back to the fullest possible extent, then it possesses the greatest dynamic power. Unfortunately, the art of action, which Lord Krishna expounded to Arjuna in this discourse, seems to have disappeared from practical life today. This is because for many centuries, owing to the lack of proper interpretation of these verses, it has been considered difficult to lead the mind to the self and become established in yoga. It is, in fact, perfectly easy to lead the attention to the field of being. One has only to allow the mind to move spontaneously from the gross field of objective experience through the subtle fields of the thought process to the ultimate transcendental reality of existence. As the mind moves in this direction, it begins to experience increasing charm at every step until it reaches the state of transcendental bliss consciousness. The reward of bringing the mind to this state is that the small individual mind grows to the status of the cosmic mind, rising above all its individual shortcomings and limitations. It is like a small businessman becoming wealthy and reaching the status of a multimillionaire. The losses and gains of the market, which before used to influence him, now have no effect upon him, and he rises quite naturally above their influence. The Lord wants Arjuna to act, but he wants him, before beginning the action, to gain the status of cosmic mind. This is his kindness. When a wealthy man wants his son to start a business, he does not usually wish him to begin in a small way, because he knows that in that way small losses and gains will influence his dear son and make him miserable or happy over trivialities. Therefore he gives him the status of a wealthy man and then asks him to start business from that level. Lord Krishna, like a kind and able father, advises Arjuna to attain the state of cosmic intelligence and then to act from the high state of freedom in life. A man cannot remain balanced in loss and gain unless he is in a state of lasting contentment. Here the Lord is asking Arjuna to get to that state of lasting contentment by a direct experience of transcendental eternal bliss. He is not advising a mere mood of equanimity. The state of transcendental bliss and eternal being is so self-sufficient that, in its structure, it is absolute. It is fullness of life, perfection of existence, and therefore completely unattached to anything in the relative field, completely free from the influence of action. When the Lord says having abandoned attachment, he means having gained this state of eternal being, which is wholly separated and detached from activity. And when he says having become balanced in success and failure, he means having reached stability in this state of eternal being. The regular practice of transcendental meditation is the direct way of rising to the state of transcendental being and stabilizing it in the very nature of the mind, so that irrespective of the mind's engagement and the conflict inherent in the diversities of life, the structure of unity and eternal freedom is naturally maintained and life is not lost to itself. Here is the definition of yoga for which the ground was prepared by the words "be without the three gunas" in verse 45. Yoga is that eternally balanced and never-changing state of transcendental consciousness which, meaning transcendent while yet grounded in the very nature of the mind, sets the mind free to participate in activity without being involved in it. The following verses extol the glory of this yoga, the balanced state of mind, and make clear its usefulness in raising the dignity of action and bringing eternal freedom to the doer.